Hey, Scott from Aristocob.com here.
And Seth from theshrinkingpastor.com.
And together, the three of us, we're out in my backyard.
Yeah, we are.
We're Markwood Men's Breakfast Club. Welcome back once again, unless you're here for the first time, in which case we've been waiting for you. We're a little change of venue here. We are in something that my wife affectionately calls a gazebo. It's more like a canopy.
It's a nice canopy, though.
It's a nice canopy.
It definitely beats the Harbor Freight canopy that you used to have.
That's true. That's true.
Or the Harbor Freight lean-to.
That was the Harbor Freight parasail that took off one day and ended up in a big old heap.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're in the backyard. It's been raining all day, but we just got back from vacation, and I'm whooped. And Seth was getting back from a long, tough day at work, and it's like, I don't want to mess with going to the shop right now. So here we are.
It's kind of perfect weather, too. It's a beautiful day to be outside and smoke a pipe.
It's mosquito weather, which is why we have the citronella candle flickering in front of us.
Yeah, I am a mosquito electromagnet, not just a rare earth magnet. I just regular magnet. They find me. They hunt me out. So they'll bite me through clothes.
Speaking of smoking, we are about to smoke something I have been wanting to smoke for a long time, and it's really quite ridiculous how badly I've wanted to smoke this. But this is a sample that we got at the Taps Pipe Show of Captain Black Grape, which you probably know that. It's probably already in the description or the title, but it's unfortunately a little dry now too. So
that should help.
Why don't we open up all these bags? We'll probably record a couple of videos tonight, and I have several samples that are from that same event, and I bet they're all just as dry. And just the air here tonight should moisten them quite a bit. And yes, it is tonight.
So let me tell you a little bit about this Captain Black Grape and how excited I am to smoke this. We got it at the Tap Show. I took the samples, which I was glad to pay $1 for, into the back of the trunk of my car. And about a week later, there was just this horrendous perfume potpourri odor seeping through my car, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me what in the world it was. The smoke, or the smell. Once I discovered it was the tobacco, it was the grape tobacco. I went to remove it. The baggie reeked of grape, of fake grape. The bag that was in reeked of fake grape. Everything that was in it was like the spirit of the grape had descended upon the trunk of my car. I can still smell it, even though I don't think the grape is in there. It hasn't been for a few weeks.
If you've not had a chance to smell this, it is the smell of grape bubble yum. Maybe grape hubba bubba to some degree, but really grape bubble yum spot on. So for me, smelling it as they were making the sample up for me was taking me back to junior high and high school. I used to chew a ton. I was the smell of grape bubble yum back in those days. Anyway, so we'll smoke this for a while and then we'll talk about it. I mentioned we just got back from vacation. My parents have been in town from Denver, Littleton, Colorado, for the last little bit more than a week. And on the way home, heading back to Denver, we had discussed about the idea of us following them out and going to Jonesborough, Tennessee. Now, Jonesborough, it turns out we've recently learned a bit about my family's history, and we learned that my great-great-great-great-grandfather lived in Jonesborough, as did a couple of his children.
That's great.
And it is great. And Jandy and I drove out there a couple months ago just to kind of scout and see what was there. And it's a really cute little town, very historic town. They've kept it up nice. And since that visit, we got put in touch with a couple people in town that are part of the Historical Society. One of the things about that town, it is the storytelling capital of the U.S., or so they claim. They have a storytelling center there, and they hold an annual event, and then there's always something. Every Saturday you go there, you could take a walking tour with one of the storytellers, and they've got a couple people that specialize in different things. The guy I was communicating with is his specialty is cemeteries. So perfect guy to be put in touch with, because I didn't know, was there a grave of any of my ancestors there? There has to be. And so we went back with my parents, and the first day, we arrived there on a Friday, we drove over. It takes a little over 3 hours to get there, so with a couple stops, it took us about 4 hours to get there. And we checked into our hotel, had a quick bite to eat, and then we went on down to Jonesborough. And we wandered around to a number of places. One of the places is a place called Markwood Circle. It is a little street that kind of goes off of a state route, makes a little bend, and comes right back onto the state route. But from what we understood, that was my great-great-great-great-grandfather's property. That was Lewis A. Markwood's property. Now, Lewis is a family name that has been used a couple times in the generation. So I have at least 2 Lewis Markwoods. We have at least 2 Lewis Markwoods in our ancestry. We have 3 Calvin H. Markwoods. My dad is Calvin. H is Horace. Calvin Horace Markwood. He is not numbered. His name is not Calvin Horace Markwood III, but he is the third in the family to have that name. My grandfather is Calvin Horace Markwood II. My dad has always gone by Cal. Anybody who knows him, he's Cal. My grandpa went by Horace. His dad was Lewis A. Markwood, and his father before him, his grandfather before him, was Calvin Horace Markwood. He went by Calvin. So during my dad's lifetime, there was a Calvin, a Horace, and a Cal, who all had the same name. Calvin Horace Markwood I came from Jonesborough, Tennessee, and moved to the Denver area around the turn of the last century. His father, Lewis A. Markwood, had died in the 1890s, and Calvin went off to start over again and went to Denver. So my dad has visited his great-grandfather's gravesite in Denver. That freaked him out a little bit because it says Calvin Horace Markwood. And at that time when he did that, the family had not purchased a headstone for my grandfather yet. And so he had never seen a headstone that had his name on it. So that was a little bit creepy. The first Calvin Horace Markwood was born in the 1850s. And so on the second day, the first day we visited this street where we have on good standing that was his property, Lewis Markwood, Calvin's dad. We went to the church that Lewis Markwood attended, and at the time of his death, services were held there, and again the 1890s. And then we know that the obituary says that he was buried 3 miles south of Jonesborough on his farm. And sure enough, Markwood Circle is 3 miles south of Jonesborough and said to be on that farm. There's no cemeteries anywhere. I was on Google Earth, I'm looking all over the place, no cemeteries anywhere. So this gentleman who I got in touch with told me that over the hill from Markwood Circle is the continuation of what would have been Lewis Markwood's property. And he said it's directly across the street from the Daniel Boone High School. And that there is a private cemetery in someone's backyard there. That there's no headstone for Lewis Markwood. However, his daughter's buried there. And his daughter's husband. And it's pretty much assumed that when Lewis died, she had him buried in that family plot. So after we went to Markwood Circle, we went over to the church and we looked all around at all the headstones. And there's, again, headstones dating back into the early 1800s. And a couple Markwoods, but nobody we knew. And so then we went over to the house that we were told had the cemetery in the backyard. Well, no one was there. We were told with the name of the people who lived there and that we should go knock on the door. And if not, that we should still be okay
to trespass
and to go to the cemetery. I mean, we got a pretty good backstory if we need
Right.
to use it. Well, my wife and my mom were scared, and so they didn't get out of the car. But my dad and I went, knocked on the door, and heard some rustling, and then we saw the little pug dog looking through the curtain at us, and so no one was there. So we walked over, took some pictures of the. There's 2 headstones that are still there and in pretty great shape. There's one that is in pieces and stacked in a pile, and then there are a couple little teeny ones that just have initials on them. None of them were LM. And so no sign of any Markwood there, but his daughter's buried there. So we have that confirmation from that part of the story. And there were also several clear sunken areas that clearly are grave sites. I conjecture that if we went out there with a metal rod, we could probably poke around and find a headstone. I would bet that a headstone was there and fell over.
Buried.
Because that's the one thing we saw at all these cemeteries was that the headstones were down. Also, there is a limestone quarry near there that's been active for years, and most of these headstones were made of limestone, so they were almost all completely eroded away.
Right.
Very, very sad. So that wrapped up our day. We headed back and had some great dinner and stayed at the hotel, and then the next morning we got out, went to Cracker Barrel. We did a lot of eating on this trip, is what I'm saying. And
as one should do when trespassing and checking out unmarked grave sites.
So we started our morning by going to the Architectural Salvage Center that the town has set up, and they have some kind of historical alliance that as homes and buildings are torn down, they ask if folks would be willing to give doors, windows, fireplace mantles, anything that they'd be willing to give. And the gentleman who had helped me, the guy that does the cemetery tours, told me that he'd be working there. So we went, sure enough, he was there. We got to meet him. It was kind of a kick talking to him a little bit and getting a few more details. And he said, hey, you got to be sure that you visit the Chester Inn. The Chester Inn has been there since the 1700s, and that the ground floor, which would have been at one time kind of a walk-in, it's not exactly a basement. You could walk in from one side, but the ground goes up and around it. So it's underground on 3 sides. And he said that's a museum, that's a permanent display with kind of a timeline of the city. And then the next 2 floors are set up to kind of mimic what they believe it would have looked like in the 1880s. And we got a little bit of a backstory of that once we got to the inn. So we go to the inn, we go through this. Actually, we got there too early. They weren't open yet. So the ladies had to go shopping, and my dad and I went out on the street and took some really cool pictures.
Trespass.
The courthouse is gorgeous. It's right there on Main Street. Old, really neat architecture, old construction everywhere. But finally, 11 o'clock, the Chester Inn opened up. We skipped the ground floor museum because my dad and I saw that the day before and told the ladies. It's interesting, but almost everything in there is newer than when our ancestors were there. So really not a whole lot of point of going to that. Let's go on up to the motel or the hotel, whatever, hotel. So we go in there, and on the ground floor, they explain that it had continued on for many years as a hotel. It changed names 3 times. That it had become an apartment at one point, and there were walls and things put up. And when the state of Tennessee took over ownership of it, they came in and tried to restore it back as close as they could to when it was most complete. Now, here's an interesting thing. The main building sits right on Main Street, but the main building had problems. It didn't have much of a dining space and much of a cooking area. So they added 2 buildings onto the back. And so when the state came through, they estimate that the building was complete as it is today. The architecture, the trim, everything had been completed in the 1880s. So they could have really picked almost any time in its history to restore it to, but they restored it with the paint and the architectural details and the interior furnishings to the 1880s. And they went on to explain that none of the interior decoration, the furniture, things like that, none of that is original.
Right.
That's long gone. But it's all, correct for the period. So he takes us into the sitting room, the parlor, and is talking about some of the things that are in there. And that's where he was explaining that pretty much everything in the room is not original to the space. He said the one thing that they did have there was they had a guest book, and he said there was a number of guest books from the history of the hotel, but that most of them are in horrible shape. He said they're turning to dust. They were record books. Who needs to see those?
Right.
But he said that last year, when they got this one book out that's actually in pretty good shape, somebody noticed that all of the days would align to this year. So they have that on display, and each day they turn it to the day in history where in 1882, that was the day that the folks were there. So he gets done telling us all this, and the group starts to move into the next room. And I walk over and I look down at this ledger, and only because I'm used to seeing my name, it said C.H. Markwood. My great-great-grandfather, Calvin Horace Markwood the first, stayed in that hotel and had dinner in that hotel. We know that because that's what the ledger said. On May 20th, 1882, exactly 135 years before we visited that room. So I take just a second to take that in, and then I called my dad over and said, "Hey, Dad, look at this." And my dad is an engineer, pretty serious guy, you know. He was, to say he was giddy, I don't think would be an exaggeration. The smile on his face didn't leave for hours, because what are the odds of that happening? We were asked not to touch the book, which is why we turned one page. And the next day, the 21st, Calvin's brother Daniel also stayed and also had dinner at the inn. So we got several pictures of my dad and of us with that book, and a bunch of pictures of the book. But what an amazing experience. Now here's the thing. I've got to get surgery on my knees. My knees are messed up, and I was wearing a leg brace, and actually my knees were hurting me so badly, I borrowed a cane that my folks had in the back of their car for some reason. And when 11 o'clock rolled around, I was actually sitting on a park bench on Main Street, and I almost said, I'm just going to go ahead and pass. I don't know if anybody else would have looked at that book, because like I said, the group was leaving. My mom and my wife were already heading out the door when I noticed that name. So,
that's cool.
Pretty cool experience.
Yeah.
We did a bunch of other stuff there. They have a visitor center. We visited the visitor center. And of course, because it was a gift shop, my wife, my mom spent money. Everywhere we went was an opportunity for my wife and my mom to spend money. That's what they do. That's what Markwood women do, I guess. But
have to do something while Markwood men are off obsessing about random things.
While we were at the architectural salvage building, we noticed up in the rafters a sign of the Andrew Jackson Hotel, and that spawned a conversation with us and Gordon, the gentleman who I had been emailing, about the hotel that used to sit right next to the Chester Inn, and that hotel burned down after only being in business like 15 years back in the 1930s. And so I later purchased a book at the gift shop, and there's that hotel pictured, and there was that sign that we saw. So I posted on Instagram pictures of the sign, pictures of the hotel with the sign hanging in front of it. That is now the site of the Storytelling Center. So if you ever go to that town, the Chester Inn sits all alone on a corner, and then there's a courtyard right next to it, and set back off the road from that is the Storytelling Center. So, very, very cool place. We're going to go back. We've learned even more about our family since that visit, and we found a number of friends that are from that area. We didn't know they were from that area. They saw that we were there, and they're like, "Oh, what were you doing in Jonesborough? My family's from there." Crazy.
That's crazy.
Small world. So are you from Jonesborough? Or Johnson City? Johnson City is the next major town, much larger town over in Washington County, Tennessee.
I'm not.
I've been doing nothing but talking. Are we out of time now?
Like 10 minutes ago, but that's all right. If you want to see a video from when they actually went and filmed with Homer and Cal, check out the Aristocob YouTube channel, or if you want to see some of the pictures, check out Instagram. They're cool. If that's the thing that
at Aristocob on Instagram.
At HollywoodHomer.com. So I see that you have taken it upon yourself to talk all the way through the smoking of this tobacco.
I have relit it.
Yeah, I see that as well. Glutton for punishment, are you? What do you think?
It is a tad bit perfumey, and I'm surprising myself that I'm not getting a lot of grape.
Yeah, I didn't pick up a lot of grape. It is not as
grape forward.
It's not as nasty as I thought it was going to be. However, if you smell the tobacco, it has a lot of the grape casing has dried off. I think, and so it smells maybe 5% as strong as it did when we got it.
So we'll have to get some.
Let's get some fresh, and really.
We don't want any of this old wine. Bring us fresh wine. The newer, the better.
Yeah, just grapes right off the vine. We'll just take some of those and smush them right down into the pipe, make a little pulp, add some tobacco. It's the way the kids are doing it these days.
It's
basically like vaping.
Okay, it's not bad. It's not bad, but it's also, of all the tobaccos that are in my normal rotation, the way it sits right now, I would not be putting this into my normal rotation. Because I'm not getting any grape.
Right. Do you think you'd be putting it into your normal rotation if you got more grape out of it?
Probably not.
Yeah. Excuse me. To that point, it doesn't have as much grape, which I think is actually works in its favor. I'm assuming works in its favor. It's a strong smell, and so as a tobacco, it wasn't as bad as I was expecting, but it's not a standout. It's just kind of a tobacco.
Yeah.
So at this point,
good to know. There's been a lot of folks that have loved it. And
really?
That's what's surprising to me, and why I was looking forward to trying it. We'll have to get a fresh pack.
Yeah.
This was taken from. They didn't have any bulk samples of this, and because we begged and pleaded, they opened up a pouch that they had there on display that was just for display, and gave us a little bit of it. So we can't
pulled some Hollywood rank there.
This is Nicole. Nicole took care of us. Nicole is taking care of me in another way that we'll talk about in another video.
Great.
So with that, thanks for joining us. Make it a great week, and we'll see you again next week, again from the tent.
See ya.
Bye.